Test. 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 Hey, I'm Eric. I'm fucking around with audio a little bit. Sorry about that. So I just want to do a quick demo of some feature of my game. It's not even the right way to call it. It's more like the architecture of the game. So I figured out something that I wish I would have, when I started the game, just sat down and figured out at the very beginning. So I guess my advice to people making games in Unity is to figure out your scene load, unload strategy right at the very beginning. Unless it's going to be a real simple game. But if it's like something that you're just trying to hope has some legs to it that you can release, it really makes sense to me now in hindsight to start with the architecture that you have for loading different scenes in. So I'll show you the little journey I went through. So first I was thinking I wanted these objects that were like singletons, but they would load and unload as you went into different scenes. And after a while I figured out, no, what I really want is one place where nothing ever unloads. And I call it the booter. So in my scenes, I've got a prefab, it's called booter. And it will contain any components that I want to persist across scenes. And I've seen some approaches where people create multiple game objects, like one for each thing they want, and I thought, I don't really need that. It seems like more overhead than I want. I don't really want like a bunch of game objects in the scene, so it probably doesn't matter that much, but it made more sense to me to put components inside of one game object called booter. And I've got some code that manages the lifetime of booter, and it says this thing is going to stay around when we go in between scenes. So I'll probably think of even more things I just want to continue to live cross scene. There's a bunch more actually, but one that was very clear was the scene loader itself, the thing which is in charge of handling the navigation between different scenes, and this thing I call the audio point pool, which is a collection of audio sources that I can use. It's a pool of them, so I don't keep creating them and destroying them. Got hiccups, but I can use them to play sounds, and so it's kind of a nice utility class, but it does need to instance all of the objects it is going to want to use at one time, so that I'm not continuously creating new audio sources as I want to play new sound effects. So I'll do a quick demo. It's always good to start these things with a demo. So there's these sort of token scenes. Delete Me 1 and Delete Me 2 are just really simple scenes that have enough shapes in them that I can identify one from another, but they're not the actual game levels. I've got those in a different project I'll pull in at some point. There's this booter game object, which is also a prefab, and if I want to change the contents of what's in booter for all the scenes, I go to the prefab and I edit the scripts that are included here, perhaps the parameters, and it will update that prefab instance across all the scenes. So I can get out of this problem I have where I'm working on one level and I've got a certain set of objects and hierarchy in there, and then I move on to a new level. I do a save as on that scene and then start making edits and also making some changes to underlying code, and suddenly I have an entirely different scene hierarchy in this other level. So what tends to happen is I'll write code that will depend upon everything being in a certain spot, and I go back to the previous level and it stops working. I break the earlier level or scene by having these sort of inconsistent hierarchies. But if I just put all inside of Booter, I make Booter a prefab, it's gonna go a lot better. I can tell it already. So yeah, let me hit play. Okay, so now if I hit the escape key, it'll take me to the level selector, which is a different scene. It loads delightfully fast. And the audio point object instance is reused across scenes. It didn't unload. And the scene loader is still present in another scene. So I can go to one of these and I can, and that'll load a different level. That one happened to be the same level I was at. Let me do another one. Alright, so there's the other level. So I mean, it took me a while to work through this and figure out the instancing and the different lifetime events of the game objects. So what I came up with is Booter. That game object is very simple code. When it starts up, if it's already been instanced, if there's some instance of Booter already there, this would happen like going from one scene to the other. It just destroys the duplicate Booter so that we're left with only one Booter, the original one that was created. So I've actually got this reversed. So the first branch that would execute is this bottom one, and it would say, okay, this is our Booter. We don't want it to ever go away when we change scenes, so called don't destroy and load. That sets it so it will not go away. Okay, then is instance is set to true. That's a static var, so that basically when the next scene loads, it's going to go through this path, and it's going to say that would be a duplicate. We don't want more than one Booter, so it destroys that Booter, leaving us with one at all times. Okay. So the Booter, if you remember, is this one game object that has got all of the what I call bootables inside of here. So here's the main script that we just looked at, then underneath are two bootables, scene loader and audio point pool. So if I look at bootable, it's also a pretty simple little class too. Whatever the script is that I'm using, I have to derive it from this bootable, and it will handle making sure that there's this nice little singleton instance. And I'll show you why it's good. If you've ever run across the problem of trying to figure out where are your game objects that you want to use in your code elsewhere, this singleton pattern is a really nice way to handle that. So you're not always having to maintain like accounting variables for or bookkeeping variables. That's the term for instances of game objects or their components. So yeah, when in the wake method, I'll just make sure that I don't double set the instance or overwrite it. So a little bit of checking to make sure that it's set up how it's supposed to be, and then I set the singleton instance, which is a static variable, and that allows me to in other places. Let me see if I can find an example. In scene loader, I've got this convention where I just say the name of the class, and I say S member. That's the static member that got set. And then I just call the method. So for these bootables, I only will ever have one instance of them loaded, and that instance will always be in this S variable. And I wanted something nice and short because I'll end up calling it a lot, so I just called it S. So what else is there here? There's an on-scene unload method. So this ends up being important when I want to keep the instance of the bootable around between scenes, but it can still contain references to objects inside of the scene that I don't want to persist. So I had this problem with my audio point pool, which is derived from bootable. You can see up here, just derive it here, bootable audio point pool. So there is a default location where sounds emit from, and it's attached to a transform. Typically it would be the main camera transform, but it's possible for code to set it to someplace else. So if I'm in scene 1 and this is set to the camera's transform for that scene, that works up until the point where I load a new scene and I still have this variable set, default position transform, referencing the camera in the old scene, and I actually want it to be set to something different. So the way I solve it is I have this on scene unload, and it sets that position to null, and the code that calls this on scene unload, it is in my scene loader class. Just says, you know, right here when the new scene is about to be activated, signal scene unload, and this will call every single bootable instance and send a signal to unload it. And so I've got this other class here that's tracking, you know, here's all the bootables we have, and when this scene changing code calls signal scene unload, we're going to go through all the bootable instances we have and call this on scene unload method. So that allows some cleanup when switching between scenes. So that's it. That's the thing I did, which doesn't look like much when you're watching it, but it's sort of the foundation of sanity for adding stuff in here. In my old levels, every single level that I loaded up and hit play, it would work, but when I would travel from one level to the next, I found that a bunch of my classes that had static members in them were failing to work because of basically a mismatch between loaded and unloaded resources. And this will allow me to kind of have a fortress or bastion. I put things in here that I want to stick around, and there's a really easy pattern for me to follow, so I'm unlikely to create some weird sort of issue that is difficult for me to figure out. I just got to follow the pattern. So that's all. That's my session. It's not like a big work session. It's just a quick little demo. I'll be continuing later on, and maybe you'll hear it. Maybe you'll see it. Stopping the stream now.